This is A Lost Plot, the podcast where we explore meaning in movies together. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot. I'm your host, Maverick, here with our guest once again, Avalon. Avalon, thanks for coming.
Hello, hola, konnichiwa, lei ho.
Now, today we are reviewing the legendary director Quentin Tarantino in one of his films that he wrote and directed, The Hateful Eight. Released in 2015, it stars Samuel L. Jackson as Major Marquis Warren, Kurt Russell as John the Hangman Ruth, Jennifer Jason Leigh as Crazy Daisy Domergue, and Tim Roth as Oswaldo Mowbray, among a whole host of other people in the cast. But anyways, we'll get into the details in a second. Today, we are reviewing this based on the 9-point rating system. So we're going to use that for you live today or in person to show you how we use it to rate our systems. So, Avalon, how would you give on a scale of 1 to 9 this movie, The Hateful Eight?
Okay, so out of 9 points, I guess, my tally ended up being 4.75.
Wow, okay, there you go. My rating ended up being a 7, so I'm super excited to see where we differed in this. But awesome. Avalon, you want to give us a summary of the movie and tell us what it's about, and then we'll get into the system.
Hateful Eight takes place in Wyoming, in the middle of, I guess, like shortly after the Civil War is roughly the time period. And it follows like a bounty hunter, like essentially two bounty hunters and their prisoner as they come to this cabin, like this I don't want to say home. What is it? Like a inn or something? Not really an inn, but it's like a stop point between
The haberdashery.
towns.
Yes.
Yeah, the haberdashery. But it's like, but there's a storm closing in, and more or less everyone on the stagecoach, which includes the two bounty hunters and the prisoner, they are forced to take refuge with the driver in this haberdashery, where there's already a collection of people already trying to wait out the storm. And then the rest of the movie kind of follows what happens between the various people and what's going on.
With a summary like that, it sounds pretty mild, but I think you can describe this movie as anything but mild.
Well, I mean, yeah.
If you're used to Quentin Tarantino movies, that's kind of expected because he just really sometimes goes off the deep end with these. But this one for sure, you go a little bit, okay, like what's going on here? So it's pretty intense, I would say, overall.
Mm-hmm.
But let's get into it. So the scenes opens up with I mean, it has the credits. I'm not going to count the credits because that was a little bit of a throwback to the old way of, revealing movies and how you had to do the credits at the beginning. I'm not sure why he added that except for the aesthetic of an old Western. But other than that, there was the opening scene. Did it catch your attention? Did you want to keep watching after that?
So the opening scene was interesting because you come across a stagecoach, come across Samuel L. Jackson's character, Marquis.
Yeah.
Like he's in the middle of the road on top of several dead bodies, and it's like he's trying to deliver them to Red Rock or the town just to collect the bounty. Yeah. And he discovers the stagecoach is being the passenger is a former compatriot of his, not necessarily a friend, but a compatriot who is Kurt Russell's character, the Hangman, and he's delivering a live prisoner, Daisy Domergue, to Red Rock. So they talk it out. There is some intensity in that moment because clearly, like, it's clear Kurt Russell is paranoid and like he doesn't trust Marquis right off the bat, and there's almost like there's tension right from the get-go. Like he isn't sure if he can trust Marquis to not try to take the bounty out from under him. So, but he eventually obliges and lets Samuel L. Jackson's character aboard the stagecoach. They keep riding, and then they come across someone else, Chris Mannix, and he manages to convince them to let him on, though grudgingly. They clearly are annoyed with him.
Yeah.
And so that brings all 5 characters to the haberdashery later on.
Right. Right. That's how it starts out. Did you think that that first scene is one that really, if you were to watch this just passively, other than watching it for the sake of this podcast, would you continue watching if you walked into the room and saw that opener?
I feel like for opening scenes, it was a very strong opening because it was like, and
Hmm.
I did give it more points on the opening because it was like right from the get go, we're establishing conflict and mistrust and a lot of like tension and like, and there's almost even like, because Domergue kind of gives the racial slur in the trailer in
Hmm.
the stagecoach, and so it's almost like it's already creating like conflicts and tension right from the get go. And on top of that, there's a storm that's following the stagecoach's heels. Like you can see it coming, and they're like, "We need
Yeah.
to keep moving." So
Yeah.
it's like it kind of creates this conflict. And at the beginning, like it doesn't make you hate or like the characters seem decent enough, especially Marquis at this point in the movie. Like and like at this point, like Marquis seems like a decent guy until later in the movie, but uh,
Yeah.
it just like so. I mean, like as far as an opener goes, like it's a
Mhm.
solid opening for a movie. I will give it credit there. So
I would agree. I think that from the very start, the movie is filled with conflict.
mhm.
And that makes it just engaging in that way where you're curious what's going to happen between obviously John Ruth and the Major and then Chris Mannix. You know, they from the start, no one likes each other. Chris Ruth is or Ruth John Ruth, excuse me, is paranoid because he this is a major bounty and he doesn't want it lost and all this stuff. But they're kind of forced into this situation, and you're coming back from an old time too, where everyone talks with each other. They don't really have
Mhm.
anything else to do. It's not like they're looking at digital phones or anything like that. So they'll have a discussion. Oh, where are you coming from? Why are you here? And all that stuff. And as much as they don't like each other, they're still having those discussions, and that just adds to the conflict.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that I thought it started off real well. It's probably one of the bigger things for this. The main character, I'm not. I would say it's the Marquis Warren. Would you say
Yeah.
that's the case?
Yeah, I say that he's probably the major main character only because of how the story flows. Like he's the first character we kind of see and like
Hmm.
from the get go, and it kind of follows his perspective for a good section of the movie, a
Yeah.
good section of the story. So it's like he's kind of front and center, and everyone else kind of he's interacting with everyone else. Like if this
Right.
was in a way when it kind of becomes a mystery to the story at one point, he kind of takes front and center. He takes point where he's like kind of the major like detective, if you will. Not
Yeah.
exactly, but it's like it's kind of where he's at, and so he's put as the major character.
Yeah, and I just asked that because it seems when you're watching this movie, it follows people pretty equally or evenly, it appears, as it goes along because you have 8 characters, hence the Hateful Eight, that it's involving, other than Daisy, who are just embroiled in this situation. So it's not exactly clear, but it's either John Ruth or it's Major Warren, and I think a stronger case can be made for Major Warren, especially later on. Um, did you think the flaws of the Major or how he's developed initially make him a compelling character?
At first, he seems like a pretty decent. Well, I mean, I'll say this: like at the very beginning, certain characters are portrayed a certain way, and at the first, he seems like a compelling character. Like he's probably most compelling at the beginning of the movie. Like
Hmm.
if there's a point where he's most compelling, it's at the beginning, where he's like, okay, you don't completely know who he is, why he's doing what he's doing. He seems decent enough, and I mean, even when he brings out the letter from Abraham Lincoln, it's like it seems like he's a good guy. So it's like
Right.
that's when he's most compelling. Whereas like, okay, he doesn't seem like he's just a bounty hunter collecting. Like obviously he's a bounty hunter, and obviously he takes like criminals in dead to collect the reward.
Right.
But other than that, it's like okay, he doesn't seem like a really bad guy, at least from the first minute of the movie.
Right. Well, I almost see him. I see some of these characters, and along with the actually, I'm just going to combine that part with the next part because everyone is so similar in this movie. The side characters, would you say that they're compelling, and are their own motives, their own needs, do they make them compelling in regards to the conflict?
Well, if we're going to be jumping around, I might as well just come out and say it. They're compelling at first, which is
Mm-hmm.
weird. Like, because I think if there's a flaw with this movie, it makes the characters compelling at the very beginning of the movie, and then it takes away that compelling reason to follow them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like they kind of become generic
Interesting.
after they become compelling, which is weird because it's like they're kind of given like different personalities. Like he's like what's the one guy? Like Oswaldo, he's like supposed to be a hangman. He's going to
Right.
hang someone in the town. You have Joe Gage. He's like writing his story, but also like going to see his mom. You just have, and then you have Bob. Wait, no, is that Bob?
Yeah, Bob, the
Yeah,
Mexican.
the Mexican. Like it's like they all seem to have their own reasons to be there. Like they all seem interesting and different. Like it's like they kind of have unique personalities. It seems like their own motives. Like they're just traveling through. But
Yeah.
then later on, when it's revealed, oh, they're not. They're lying. They all were part of the Donahue gang. Like
Yeah,
they're
the
all here to
Dahmer
help.
Yeah.
Yeah, Domergues. Like they're all trying to help Daisy escape. Like that's the
Yeah.
real reason they're all there. And it's like at that point they all become generic because there's really like you don't know why they're all there, why they're all following uh the Domergue gang. Like why are they there? It's just like they're
Interesting.
just there as like muscle at that point. And it's like, okay, you've lost your compelling reasons for these characters at some point. And so
Interesting. I wasn't really thinking about that. I see where you're coming from. At that point, there's so much going on that
mm-hmm,
passes over my head, or did
mm-hmm,
pass over my head. I see where you're coming with that. Would
mm-hmm,
you say, so these 2 points, um, about the side characters and the main character and how they're flawed and compelling,
mm-hmm.
you did not give them value for that, right? You didn't give them points on that regard,
No,
correct?
I had
At
to
that
take
point.
points away from that because it's like I mean there was effort at the beginning, and I don't know, maybe I don't know what Tarantino was thinking with this, and maybe he was just trying to be like, oh, plot twist, shocker, and just like twist this. But then the
Mhm.
process of like creating a shock value, he took away some of the value of the characters in the process.
I think, okay,
So,
so interesting.
mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Like I mean, I'll be honest, like as far as like value of characters, like compelling
Mhm.
characters, Chris Mannix is probably at the end of the day the most compelling character on a certain level because
Mhm.
you think he's lying, only turns out he's probably not lying at the end, and it's like he's this complicated kind of character at the side who has to decide what he's going to do at the end of the day. Like,
Right.
so it's like he's kind of put in this situation at the end where like he has to decide certain things, and so it's like
Yeah.
he's kind of given more like if anyone's going to be compelling in this story, it's him, the
Right.
supposedly new sheriff of Red Rock, who no one believes until the very end.
Right. Yeah, he, as a character, he
mm-hmm.
definitely is the one who is most, and maybe this actually goes down to some of the values later on in the story, but so
Mm-hmm.
here's my, I see where you're coming from. I think I still disagree, so I'm gonna make my case for my side, but
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised if you still disagree afterwards. So
Okay.
the main character is is a bad man, right?
Yes.
We know this by the end. The Major Warren is not a good guy,
mm-hmm.
and he really cares about nothing but his own hide. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that inherently creates someone so it's interesting because everyone in this movie is doing either, you could construe it as doing something somewhat noble, okay? And
Mm-hmm.
here's my case for that. The bounty hunters are trying to bring in evil people and put them in jail or kill them, right? Bring
Mm-hmm.
justice. The Domingre gang is there to save their companion. They're trying to stick together and
Well, in a
be
sense, of
loyal to each
saving
other.
their leader's sister.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could construe that as a noble goal. But at the end of the day, they're doing it the wrong way. They're doing evil things to achieve their ends, and at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the day, that's not what actually motivates them. So, like at the end of the day, they're motivated for money, or they're motivated to save their own hide, or they're motivated to kill another person, or to be the supreme gang, to achieve their own ends, whatever it is. That's what they're out for. And so I would say that at the beginning, for sure, the main character is flawed in a compelling way, and he seems to have some good things going for him. The side
Mm-hmm.
characters are, I would say, so I would say the first point is the main character flawed in a compelling way. I would say yes, but I could see how you would say no, and I think you make a decent case for it. Are the side
Mm-hmm.
characters and supporting cast driven by their own motives and needs? I would say 100%, and those needs are not necessarily noble, and they don't have to be. And that point, I think, will still stand in my mind regardless. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that even like some of that compelling part is the fact that their motives are the same as each other in some ways, but they're also opposed, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they want money and they want to survive. That's what the bounty hunters want. And in a perfect world, they would kill the other bounty hunter and take their bounty, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what makes them it just seeds the world for conflict with each other,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just perfect for creating that between the side characters and the main character.
Yeah, that was the one that does lead to one question I had about the movie, which I felt wasn't very clear. Was
Mhm.
why Samuel Jackson's character, Marquis Warren Major, why he didn't just decide to take Daisy Domergue's character? Like, why didn't he just decide to take it from John Ruth? Like, to steal her out from under him. Like,
Yeah.
there is an aspect here. She was worth more money than the bodies he had,
Mhm.
and I don't know. Like, there is a case to be said. Like, based on his character, especially later on in the movie, it almost like, well, he's already a selfish character. Like, why would he not steal her out? Like, why wouldn't he not take advantage of the situation? Especially
Yeah.
considering that he is kind of an opportunist at certain points in the movie, like taking advantage of certain scenarios for his own good and like for his
Mhm.
own benefit. And it's like, so I don't know, like that question isn't fully answered in my mind, and I feel like it's not. It's a blank. Like, I don't want to say a plot hole, but it's a very like odd point for me. Like, I'm not sure. Like, this makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. I
So,
would say, so my impression of the movie based on that question is that they this story
mhm.
is kind of about people devolving, basically. So, people coming from being good people, or like being okay people, the slow devolving of someone. Well, actually not as slow as other movies, but the how someone goes from being willing to do one thing to no bars hold kind of thing, because you get this impression that he's trying to be there is some code that the bounty hunters live by, right? Some sort of
Okay.
code. It's not
Mhm.
exactly clear what it is, and that could be a complaint, which I think is what you're saying, is that there's no
Mhm.
clear it's not clear what the bounty hunter code is. It
Mhm.
indicates that there is a code, is what I would say. And that code goes out the window by the end of the movie.
Okay. No, that's why I didn't really factor that into my score, that question, but it was a thing I
Mhm.
had in my mind. It was like, I'm not sure. Like, it was one of those questionable elements of the movie.
Sure.
So,
And
mhm.
that would go into the setting of the place. Did you think that the setting was believable and do the rules of the world they're in make sense?
For the most part, I'd say yes. Like, it does follow like the Wild West kind of idea, like
Mhm.
in a way, and like there is some law and order. There are rules, and people do kind of follow them. Um, so I mean, there is, and even the fact that just follows the Civil War, like it does set up this believable, like, because if there's nothing that's very believable, it's these characters' backstories. Some of them are crafted very well, where it's like it leads immediately into conflict, where it's like,
Mhm.
okay, like
Mhm.
Major Warren is clearly fought for the side of the Union in the Civil War. Kurt Russell's character John Ruth was clearly sympathetic to the Yankees and the Union, whereas Chris Mannix has family who fought for the Confederacy. Like,
Right.
it's like
Exactly.
he's clearly got ties to that. And then there's the general who's staying at the haberdashery, the General Sandy Smithers, and
Yeah.
it's like he fought directly in the Confederacy and actually fought directly against the major in one of the battles. So it's like there's clearly like they don't see eye to eye.
Right.
So, and even like some of the other characters, there is some slight. I mean, even you don't see as much between Joe Cage and the other characters like Obi and such.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just like, yeah, but like there's clearly some conflict set up from the get go. Like, and
Right.
those are well a natural. Like, it makes sense why people are upset at each other, why there's this conflict there.
And it's more than just the looming issue, which is one, the weather, and two, the danger of Daisy Darmagu being saved by someone in the haberdashery, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
extra like layers and layers of conflict between, okay, black versus white people versus Confederate versus Union, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of these other areas where, or even, hangman and sheriff versus other people who are all about their money, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's all these different layers of conflict just seeded throughout this, and that it makes for a great, it just makes for a melting pot of danger and a melting pot of conflict to go on. So I think you're absolutely right on that point. There's I guess the question is, does the main character, if they do not achieve their goal, will they lose everything or be in a chance of sacrificing everything they need to live their life? Could they go back to their life as it was before if things don't go according to their plan or according to their ideals?
I want to say no because he would technically be dead.
Uh-huh.
So it's
Interesting.
like,
Okay.
I mean, technically, if you're going to be like technical about this, he can't go back to the way things were if he fails
Right.
because he dies. So,
Right.
especially after he kills what's his name, Bob.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was already question about it after he killed Smithers. Like, he goads Smithers into attacking him, like,
Mhm.
intentionally. But yeah, like, he goads him. He gets Smithers to attack him and then kills him. And then he kills Bob when he realizes Bob was lying and actually killed Minnie, the owner of the haberdashery.
Right.
Like, it's clear, like, after a certain point where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
his life is already on the line. So,
Yeah. And the chance of, in this movie, it's an all or nothing stakes. So
mm-hmm.
this is a situation where even if you're not the main character, honestly, if you're just a side character, your life is kind of at stake too, just by joining the party. So everyone is in a there's no situation out of this that's great. It's either you live or you die, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's not how it starts, and they try to do things quote unquote legally or morally earlier on,
Mm-hmm.
especially as you referenced with Sam Smithers, but then it just gets worse. It just gets so much worse, and then all the rules go out the window. So the main villain or obstacle in this movie, uh which is the Domingre gang, but you don't really know at that point. But do they appear to have good motivation, means, the way to achieve their own end that is a serious obstacle to the protagonist?
Say that again. The way you said that was kind of
So
weird.
it more or less is the villain compelling.
Well, if you could talk as a group, maybe a little bit. I don't know. Like the villain, if you're talking about Daisy herself, she's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a passive character for the majority of the movie, where she's
Right.
kind of just there. She doesn't exactly do anything or do much for the movie. She just threatens people, insults them, gets beat up by some people. So it's like she's kind of like, not that she does nothing,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not really given a lot of reason to fear her, like her. It's just like he's kind of just there as a
Right.
villain goes. Like if we're just talking about Daisy, now if we're talking about the gang itself, like once you realize who they are, I mean, as I said, the other guys like they kind of become stock characters. Like, okay, why are they part of the gang? Like, what's going on? Like, what is the big deal? Like, they're following clearly their leader, who's the brother of Daisy, like,
Right.
and like he has clear reason for saving her. Um, so I mean, and they kind of hint at, like, they kind of give some development for that, but so I mean, I guess and I don't want to say there's no compelling reason for the villains, but it's not strong either. So I guess it would
Interesting.
be middle of the road for me. That's what I would say.
See, especially as you talk about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I get where you're coming from with the characters and
Mm-hmm.
how they are not as developed as the story goes on, which is kind of ironic because it should usually go the other way.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, there is an element to a great villain, and that is, well, there's two different types of villains which I think are compelling. The one that I think is used in this one is that of the mystery to them
Mm-hmm.
and how you just don't know who the villain is, and that makes this foreboding fear kind of similar to how you don't really know the ring wraiths or who they are, where they came from exactly, and this shroud of mystery around them creates a level of terror about who
Mm-hmm.
they are and what they're going to do. It's not embodied in the same way, but it's the same type of element, if that makes sense, where it's
Hmm.
this mystery that makes the villains compelling. So I did give this one a point, but it is interesting that you're taking the long term view and looking at the end result a lot more than I was. I was looking more on a case like as the story progressed, answering this question at that point in the story, and my point was like, yeah, they are, but by the end, you're absolutely right. They're less developed than they are at the beginning
Hmm.
or in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. Would you? What is your thoughts on the mystery aspect to the villains?
There isn't a whole lot of mystery to Daisy. Let's just put it that way. She's kind of
Hmm.
upfront, like she killed people. She's a criminal, like, and she's going to get killed. Like she's being delivered to be hanged.
Yeah.
So, the other guys, I guess there's some mystery about their characters because it's not clear completely if they're telling the truth or not. Maybe, but
Yeah.
so I mean, it's semi. And I guess in that way, it's kind of a mystery story. It's like what's going on, who's doing what, are they all on the same side, are they not? I
Hmm.
mean, and that's all kind of answered through the flashback part of the story, where it goes back and tells the prior part of the story where they came to the cabin before Major Warren and John Ruth.
Right.
So like all of those
Right.
questions get answered, then all the mystery is gone at that point. So
Yeah, that's true. That's interesting. Um, I think we'll continue on with that. Okay, so the main character, the do they stand for an ideal? Do they not? Is there something that makes the situation what they're doing the right thing to do?
it's hard to say if the main character has a ideal they stand for. I'm just gonna be
Hmm.
honest. It's like very hard to pinpoint anything. Like the only thing that I could really come to mind in a way was hatred,
Hmm.
or like
Right.
because it's like clearly some of his like kills and his bounty hunting stuff is motivated by the Civil War and his hatred of white people, and like he clearly has a grudge, and
Hmm.
it's like he clearly takes advantage of being vicious and cruel to people when he can be, especially his
Hmm.
enemies. And it's like,
Hmm.
okay, so it's like he's not. I mean, as I said, like he's most compelling at the beginning of the movie when you don't know much about him, and then once you learn more of his backstory and how he's like kind of a liar in some regards, it's like
Yeah.
okay, he becomes less compelling and becomes like okay, you're. I mean, like what he stands for becomes less of like a draw. He
Right.
becomes less likable.
Right.
So
Yeah.
So I mean, I, like if he stands for anything, and like a lot of the conflict at a certain point in the movie kind of comes from him. Like with him killing the general, it kind of sets the ball rolling for everything else in a
Yeah.
certain way.
Well, yeah. Once people start dying in this movie
Mm-hmm.
a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Oh goodness. No, and honestly, I for this point, I did not give them anything for it. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that the major stands for anything except for
Mm-hmm.
self-preservation, which isn't an ideal or the right thing to do in any sense of the word. And so this it's while self-preservation, especially in a high stakes environment like this, does put the stakes way up here, right? It doesn't it doesn't give the movie anything that's memorable, anything that's gonna make it last in time.
Mm.
And so this this character doesn't really have anything that compels you to root for them because they don't stand for anything other than themselves.
Yeah.
And
And,
even with their like little thing about being friends with Abraham Lincoln and all of that stuff at the beginning of the movie, that's even if that was true, that's still not a very that still doesn't give him an ideal of any sense.
mhm. Well, it's just like, yeah, like he doesn't stand for anything, and he doesn't really change as a person either. Where it's just like I was just
Oh
saying, like he
no.
does like
Yeah.
as he's just uh he kind of stays static for the majority of the movie. He only changes in his opinion of Mannix. Like that's the only thing that really changes.
If you were to revise this, how would you change it so that there was an ideal appropriate for this movie that he stood for, that Major Warren stood for?
The movie would have been better. Like, and it kind of goes back to the letter because I remember
Mhm.
how the movie ends with the letter being read off again,
Yeah.
and it's like, but it's read aloud, and like it almost seemed like the idea was to try to promote this idea of unity, like kind of like, okay, hatred destroys, like we need to be kinder to each other,
Mhm.
but it kind of falls flat after everything that happened because everyone was just vicious and mean to each other this whole movie. Um, so I feel like if you were going to give this movie a solid footing, you would have to change Major Warren's character drastically. Like, make his character more
Mhm.
in line with what the letter was saying. Like, it can more reconciliatory. Doesn't mean he isn't, like, he doesn't take chances, that he doesn't, like, he isn't selfish or anything like that. Doesn't mean those things. He could still do some of those things, but it'd be more for a higher, like there'd be other reasons for it, like more pure motives, I guess,
Yeah.
behind his actions. It wouldn't be hatred or like just to be vicious or mean to people. Like he'd have like a more compelling reason behind it.
No, I think you're absolutely correct. And
Mm-hmm.
even the letter could still be a lie. I still think he could
Mm-hmm.
be a compelling character. The letter could still be a lie, but
Mm-hmm.
the Major Warren actually believes that kindness is the highest value, or justice even is the
Mm-hmm.
highest value. And that could be displayed in, for example, the discussion that Oswaldo Mowbray has earlier on when he's discussing the value of justice and how
Mm-hmm.
he, as the hangman, is the highest good, more or less, because he is impartial when it comes to punishing these people. And if Major One would interject and have a little discussion with them about the value of, let's just say, mercy or kindness or justice, or how basically what he would stand for in that discussion, that
Mm-hmm.
could be a valuable point to make in that part of the story if that was in line with his character. But like you said, these characters are very well developed on the backstory, and so in order to actually have an ideal that he stood for, he would have to fundamentally change his character. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
little, I would say most times it's not that hard to just say, "Oh, you should have added this." But in this case, it is because the characters are so well
Mm-hmm.
developed on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just insert that in there as easily. So, the main character's goal, is it something worthy of pursuing and significant for their life? Are they fighting for small pennies, or is this a big deal?
They're fighting for small pennies.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, yeah. Okay. I actually think you're right on that. That's hilarious. Um, I didn't think my opinion could be changed so quickly. Okay. You didn't even make an argument. You just put it in perspective by how you said it. Okay. Yeah. So to be honest, they're just fighting for money.
Yeah.
So, and this kind of goes back to the ideals, but in their mind, it is something significant.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to make the case even for that, because you don't have a discussion on how, like, let's just say, you have to play this from the character's perspective, right? So let's just say that in their universe, in their world, is this something worthy of pursuing? if this was life-changing money that allows them to do X, Y, or Z that fundamentally changes their life, you could maybe make the case at this point that they are pursuing something worthy of pursuing, even
Mhm.
if it's just money. But they don't do that. It's all we're selfish, and I mean that's kind of the point because they're not good
Mhm.
people. But uh, it just means that this isn't a goal. It isn't a great
Mhm.
goal. It's not. They've put themselves in harm's way for the sake of making a couple extra bucks, and it's
Yeah.
not clear why that's worth pursuing. There you go. You got me. That's gonna go in the books. Um, okay, so anything else you want to say on that point? I don't know if that
I
stole
feel
any
like
of
I
your
said
thunder.
everything I needed to say on that point.
Yeah, interesting. It's so funny. Okay, heightened tension.
Mhm.
The hero or the main protagonist is thrown consistently from a bad situation to a worse situation with losses that cannot be reversed.
Mhm.
How do you think they did in this movie?
I mean, there was some losses. Like, it wasn't
Hmm.
like the hero is always succeeding. Like,
Hmm.
I mean, after all, he does get hurt pretty badly.
Yeah.
um, so the reality is, I mean, there is some losses, but I wasn't. I mean, I don't want to say I was. I definitely wasn't at the edge of my seat though, always wondering if they're going to lose or die. I mean, there was definitely question if they're going to die, but I don't know. Like, because this is the one you had a 25-point scale on it. Like, this
Yeah.
is the one that had a
Yeah.
lot of points based on the rating. So I kind of gave it middle of the road again, only because there was question. It wasn't
Hmm.
completely clear at the end of the movie who was going to win and who was going to lose. So there was question, but as I said, I wasn't at this point of the movie. I wasn't hugely compelled by the major, and it was just like there was a part of me like if he had lost and if he had died then to Daisy, I would not have cared that much.
Sure.
Like it was one of those things. Where I was like, I didn't feel
Hmm.
like I just was curious to see how it played out, like who is going to come out on top. But I didn't really care who actually won.
Would you say that that's related to?
I mean, if anything, like I would have maybe cared a little bit more for the major, only because Daisy was a little bit more annoying. But other than that, yeah.
Uh-huh. That's funny. Do you think that that's related to how the character is as a person versus the scenario playing out?
Well, I mean, it's a good scenario. Don't get me wrong. Like the
Mhm.
way it's played out, like it does try to keep the intensity going, and that's why I kind of had to give it at least middle of the road, if not a little bit
Mhm.
above that, just because I was like, okay, there is some, like it was a decent situation. If the characters had been more compelling, if there was more like okay reason to follow one character more than the other, maybe I would have had more like oh what's gonna happen, but like if they had done what we just said, where it's like changed the Matrix character, that
Mhm.
scene would have been way more compelling.
Right.
So like because we had had more reason to root for him, like okay, what's going on? Like he can't get out of his bed. He's like wounded, hurt. His gun, he's out of
Mhm.
bullets. Like what's gonna happen?
See what you're saying. I think so. This is the part where I disagree for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The heightened tension, I think, is related to, in regards to the conflict, the main protagonist is consistently in this story thrown from a bad situation to a worse situation. And the
Mm-hmm.
losses simply can't be reversed because they have people who are tentative allies getting knocked out of the roster like every 10 minutes. And so you're in a situation where their chance of surviving against an unknown enemy, whoever the mysterious ally of Daisy Domergue is eliminating opponents. And so he's it's rapidly getting worse. I think that the so I would say that of all points in the story, regardless of whether or not the character is compelling as a person, I think that the heightened tension that the story creates is some of the best that I've seen. I think that he's consistently making it, not only is this a bad situation, it's just gotten worse in a way that can't be reversed.
I could kind of see that. I don't know if I agree with that, only because I feel like characters in conflicts create tension, and so like the base of characters, like your opinions of the characters, more or less, do shape like whether you're actually care about the conflict or not. Because I mean, it's in a way, it's kind of like
Mhm.
you come across like say you come across a couple like angry and yelling at each other in the middle of the street. Like if they're complete strangers, you're not going to care like really about the conflict necessarily, about them yelling. Like it'll
Yeah,
be a
but you're
disturbance.
watching.
Like it
You're
depends.
watching.
Like I mean,
What happens when there's an accident on the freeway? Everyone slows down.
I don't. I try to get past it and get going. I guess for me
Uh,
personally, I see two strangers fighting. I try to get away from the situation. Like, okay, I'm not going to get involved because like I don't know what's
sure,
going
sure.
on. Like for me, if I don't know, and then if it's like two people I know, where it's like I'm more involved in the stakes, what's going on, where it's like I actually care about the people. Like there is a like, it's going to be more like intense. Like okay, what's going on? Like please stop fighting. Like figure this out. Like
Sure.
there is a difference between the two scenarios where it's like if you care about the people, it's going to matter a whole lot more.
Sure,
So,
sure. And I think that that's definitely I don't disagree that this movie would be better if it had more if it had characters developed in a way that you could actually root for them, right?
mm-hmm,
I would 100% agree with that point. What my argument is that the tension in the story
mm-hmm,
is very good, devoid of caring about the characters. And I think it's
mm-hmm,
similar to not exactly the same. And the reason for that is because the character grows in A
mm-hmm,
Christmas Carol, which is what I would say is comparable. But Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol is a despicable human being, and you
mm-hmm,
do not like them. But at the
mm-hmm,
same time, the conflict is pretty compelling, and you're still interested to see what happens because the way that the tension is heightened is
mm-hmm.
phenomenal. Same thing for okay, I'm gonna brand myself on this one, but in Death Note, when they have the main character Light, he is a despicable human being. But at the same time, the way that the tension is developed is one where you are compelled to keep watching because you want to see what happens. And the way that they
Mm-hmm.
heighten that tension is just off the charts. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I think is that this movie, you're right that
Okay.
it could be better, but I think
Mm-hmm.
in regards to this specific point, I don't take away any points because this is the one thing that Quentin Tarantino did excellently, and I think actually does excellently in most of his movies, is that he is very good at taking a person and putting them in an even worse situation and raising the stakes in a way that can't be reversed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would argue. I mean, just briefly, like I don't want to keep this
Sure,
argument
sure, sure,
going,
sure.
but
Yeah, 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 that's
just
fine.
as far as that example, like Death Note, Light in that particular story, like at the very
Hmm.
beginning, like of that conflict, there is still a compelling reason to root for him, even though he is this despicable character, because he does at the beginning care about his family a little bit. He cares about his dad.
Hmm.
He cares a little bit about his mom and like the family members, people, some of the people around him. But like it changes as the story progresses. He becomes more despicable as it goes on.
Right.
But you're right. There is a lot of tension in that story because of like everything that happens and the conflict and whatnot. But still, like he isn't completely despicable at the beginning of the movie. Like you're given like some compelling reason to care about Light's character and what's going on, more or
Hmm.
less. Like he has some traits. Now he loses those traits kind of over the course of the story, but more or less, it's like you have some reason. Whereas with the
Sure.
major and some of the characters here, you're not given a whole lot of compelling reason.
Would
So
you say that the major is given a compelling reason, or he appears to be good at the beginning, and
mhm.
then that changes as well for him?
I would say he's portrayed as good because he's clearly a bounty hunter and he
Hmm.
kills for a living. Like that's from the get go. Like he's an interesting character at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Like, and there's mystery to his character, so like you're not sure completely what's going on. He seems to be a good guy. He seems to
Yeah.
be, but you're not sure. Like, because it's kind of like the whole like this movie does have some mystery elements to it. Like you're not completely sure where people stand, but it's revealed as it goes on, and characters are revealed to be despicable or selfish or whatever. It just like
Yeah, yeah.
so. I'd say the beginning of the movie is when he's the most compelling, but that doesn't mean he's completely compelling in the same way as like Yagami or something like that. That's
Interesting.
my
Okay.
argument.
even at the beginning when he was portrayed as an okay guy,
Mm-hmm.
he was still in some way devoid of any noble attributes, whereas Light Yagami was simply what did have good attributes for him at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of his story.
I mean, if there is any compelling like reason for the Major, is that he's going after criminals. Like he's a bounty hunter
Mhm.
who goes after some like he kills like villains and people whatnot and brings them in for the money. So I guess in some regards he's kind of justice like cares about justice a little bit, but I mean I don't know. It's
And you would say that the way to make that better, if I'm understanding this correctly, would be
mm,
going back to fundamentally changing the character, right?
yes. Mm.
Okay, cool.
Even giving us more reason to care about the character, to
Mhm.
be more compelling, whatnot. Um, I mean, if an example comes to mind, I don't know if you've seen this movie, but the remake of The Magnificent Seven, which had Denzel Washington, Chris Pratt, and a few other like it was a so in that movie, Denzel Washington kind of takes the lead like cowboy role of the Magnificent Seven.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
he's a black guy, a black cowboy too. Um, but he has a grudge against the main like white like oil the tycoon in the town who's like trying to take the town from the people. He's
Mhm.
like he has a grudge against him because this guy and it was revealed had killed his family, killed Denzel
Mhm.
Washington's family, like in a racist like murder kind of situation. And
Right.
so like even though it's kind of gives you like gives Denzel Washington, even though it's not a great reason like revenge, it's still like it gives you some sympathy, like some compelling reason, like he's doing this because of his family, like the people he lost.
Right.
So it's like it's not
Yeah.
completely selfish. It's like okay, there was someone important to him and they were taken from him.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Yeah, I see what
like
you're
even if they
saying.
did that for the Major in this movie, like that would have been more compelling.
Right.
So
And just going back to the idea that the morals and ethics of characters do matter, and that
mhm.
translates into how much we care or how much we're drawn in during times of crisis in the middle of the story.
Mhm.
Got it. Yeah, no, I think that's a good comeback. The movie is obviously a mystery to some degree.
Mhm.
There the question I guess for you is, was there a revelation in this movie that changed everything?
The only two that might count as that come to mind is one, the letter being a lie, kind of
Mhm.
revealing that the Major's character is a liar, like he's not completely like kind of revealing well he's not as upright as we think, or as
Mhm.
maybe led to believe at the beginning, but that happens early on in the movie. Like, or at
Right.
least seems to happen early on. Forget when it happens, but it's like, okay, it was a lie. The letter wasn't actually from Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
Um, so I mean, it does kind of change some things about the Major's character when you find out about that. Um, the other thing was the revelation of what's his name in this basement.
Yeah, the brother.
Yeah, the brother. Like, because up until that point in the movie, you think it's just the people you see in the main part of the building. It's not until we
Yeah.
suddenly get this shot of this guy in the basement shooting through the floor that we realize there's someone else in the that we haven't seen yet in this
Jody
scenario.
Domingue.
So, and then it goes back and explains who he is and where, like, how this happened, and it
Mhm.
takes away all the mystery, but it makes sense. Like, okay,
And I've seen this movie a couple of times. Whether or not you think that's a great thing is up to you. But the I was thinking as I watched it recently,
mm-hmm,
if there it's it would have been nicer if that section where they revealed the backstory was a little tighter,
mm-hmm,
but it was, I think, in some ways just developing how despicable these characters are and how hateful they are and how evil they are. But
mm-hmm,
the but to be honest, it was such a long revelation scene that it seemed a little much. But yes, I think I would agree with you that Jodie Domingue Gray, Channing Tatum showing up in the movie was probably the biggest revelation in the movie, and
mm-hmm.
I think it changed enough that I gave it a point on this
Yeah,
because it showed that it turned the tide definitely in favor of the Domingue Gray gang. Where before
mm-hmm,
that, Major Warren had them up against the wall, literally, and
mm-hmm,
was going to figure out who was on Daisy Domergue's side and kill him. But that when he shoots him through the floorboards, that changes everything. So yeah. Was there a knockout surprise at the climax or the ending of the movie? Some big, like, oh my goodness, they survived in this way or whatever?
No. I mean, there is like, I mean, that does add, if anything, adds another question because it's like, I guess in a way it isn't fully, or I mean, it's kind of passed off as like Daisy like spitballing, like, oh, I'm making up that 15 men or whatever that are coming to the town. Like, it's their existence is kind of not like proven false or true. So the movie ends before that happens.
Right.
Like, it only adds a question. It doesn't really have like a major change or whatever. Like,
and not only that, but the two characters that hang Daisy Domergue at the end of the movie both say, well, Major Warren says, well, we're going to die anyways from our wounds. So it's indicated that literally everyone dies.
Yeah.
And that means that whether or not there was 15 men kind of doesn't matter. It just means that the end, honestly, it in some ways the movie was leading up to this. That the question is everyone going to die? The answer is yes. Literally everyone dies. And so you can't really say that it's a surprise ending, a knockout ending in any ways. It's just incredibly, incredibly bloody. With many heads getting blown off in typical Quentin Tarantino style. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a way you would say you could make this better? How would you improve the ending?
I mean, because the only, like, positive, like, I guess in a way, like, because it was used to get the conflict going, more or less, was the division between the Confederate side of the people and the Yankee side or whatever. Like, if there had been some reflection between Major Warren and Chris Mannix at the end, and like maybe if they had learned, like, you know what, if we had worked together sooner, if we had put aside our differences, realized the war is over, like if there had been some discussion along those lines, if there had been like, I don't know, if they had been like some more reconciliation, like as far as like actual talk or something, maybe you would have changed things a little bit. I mean, I'm not sure how you would have done that though. It's just like, because without it being forced or weird, like because you want it to flow naturally. But at the same time, it's like
Yeah.
if there had been a recognition of how all this hatred and all this anger led to the conflict and ultimately led to everyone dying here, like if there had been a recognition of that, maybe it would have given the movie a little bit more value.
Right. Well, especially to have a surprise ending, I
Mm-hmm.
think you're thinking along the right lines where you would have some sort of twist where there is some union between sides. Maybe not those two people because they were already amicable in some way, but maybe between General Smithers, if he was
Mm-hmm.
still alive at that point in the movie, and them,
Mm-hmm.
who is very much an enemy, or something along the lines of, let's just say, one of the villains, if they had a more developed backstory and they actually, their hatred was turned back on their own side, almost
Mm-hmm.
like a Gollum destroying himself kind of thing, that the
Mm-hmm.
enemies, the evil destroying themselves kind of situation, that could have made some sort of knockout surprise ending, climax ending in a way that was more fulfilling, or told a value that was actually surprising or interesting or thought provoking in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that really rewriting a knockout ending, a surprise ending, is probably the hardest thing you can do in a story. And so it's really hard to say right off the cuff what
Mm-hmm.
I would do different on that one. But it does need work. It does need work. That doesn't give
Yeah.
him an excuse. Does the main character grow as a person? I know we're going to
We
talk
already
about this.
answered this one.
No way. So is there a way it exists currently where you think they could have grown him, developed him?
I don't know. I mean, it's like they would have to have added more scenes. They'd have had to add some things to make the characters more compelling, I guess. I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of where it's like they added more, like, and maybe that's why there's an extended edition. Like maybe they did add some scenes or something. I don't know.
Considering, I kind of doubt it, but it might be worth watching to review.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, Major Warren ends up with the same values he starts with. If I want to live and if I die, I want to take as many people with me. And that's pretty much what happens. Now, interestingly, themes. Does this movie have a theme? And if it is, what do you think it is?
If there is a theme, it's something along the lines of like how hatred and yeah, like how hatred divides, something like that.
I think I'd go along the same lines. I would say it
Mm-hmm.
does have a theme, but the theme is more like an Aesop's fable type of be sure your sins will find you out, or hate
Mm-hmm.
only leads to destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Or
I could
hate
see
destroys
that. Yeah.
itself, kind of that thing. It's not a great theme. It is a theme. Does it get
Mm-hmm.
a half point in my mind for that? Technically, yes. Maybe that should be revised to get half a point because it's not a compelling theme. But I think that that just goes back to earlier in the story
Mm-hmm.
that that part isn't compelling.
I guess it should have been less focused on creating shock conflict. I guess like it should have been
Mhm.
more focused on giving meaningful conflict, not shock conflict in this
Yeah,
movie. So
interesting.
that's probably what it should have been. Like it.
So you would say like almost this falls into the same issue that a lot of horror movies do, where it's got some gripping, intense scenes, but at the end of the day, you don't care.
Yeah, I'd say that.
I hadn't compared those two before, but that's definitely a case with horror movies. Um, would you say this movie left you with the desire to watch the next one, or left you satisfied, or were you unsatisfied by the end of this?
I was unsatisfied. I mean, I know there's an extended edition. Maybe the extended edition redeems itself, but I don't think I'm gonna watch it. So,
I think it's a hard case to make that that
I mean, I'm
a
not gonna say I wasted my time. This movie is definitely better than other movies I watched recently. It's
Blue
definitely
Beetle.
not great. It's definitely not a movie I would say is a classic in my mind.
Not only does this movie not leave you satisfied, but it actually leaves you with almost unease, in my
Hmm.
opinion, where you are not inspired, not uplifted at all with this movie. It just gives you almost a warning, if you will, and then you're uncomfortable, and then it ends. And
Yeah.
you get the same feeling you get with 10 Cloverfield Lane, where you're like, okay, well, that just happened. Awesome. I'm gonna sleep on that, unfortunately. Yeah. So, just kind of summing it up, what is something that this movie really could have improved on, and what is something this movie did excellently?
I mean, we kind of already touched on what it could have improved on, but like just
Sure.
give like make the main character more compelling. Like
Hmm.
give it more like make the conflict and such more meaningful instead of less shocking. Like that's like I think the big thing it could have improved on.
Yeah.
Um with that being said, the tension is, as you said, I would agree the tension is very well at the one point in the movie. Like
Hmm.
as far as story structure and story tension, like it's actually very well done for that one scene. Like it's like
Yeah.
okay, that's like it does kind of like okay, what's like? Cause I was interested, even though I wasn't like rooting for one side or the other. I was like, okay, what's gonna happen? I was staying to watch, see what happens, but I wasn't gonna care who won.
Yeah.
Not really. So
Yeah.
I'll give it kudos for that. Like it.
No, I think I would agree. I would say that there was nothing to root for in this movie, and so there was no values or themes that really made it compelling. There was simply characters that were very well developed and developed in such a way that they naturally produced conflict between the conflict and the backstories. They created a compelling source of conflict throughout the movie, and I think that that was the best thing they did. But there was nothing going for it in regards to themes and values. So, hot take at the end. What do you think? Would you still rate this movie with with the rating you gave it at the beginning? I think you had 4.75.
I might modify it by half a point. Like might make it 5 points. Like five
Okay.
might make it a 5 point rating.
Uh
Just
huh.
because I think I gave it less points on something that you gave it more points on. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Well, you don't have to change it because I had a different rating.
No, 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 no. But
Uh,
you made at the time. I didn't say it out loud, but you actually made a semi compelling case for why that was better than what why I gave it. I gave it less points, but you gave it more points, and you gave a reason
mhm.
why. And it was actually in my mind like actually it's a fair reason. And I was like,
Okay.
So like I would probably give it maybe half a point more just because of that. So maybe 5 points or something. Like,
Well, I know for myself, you did make a compelling point about the main character's goal being not something worthy or significant of pursuing. So that knocks half a point off my rating. You have successfully changed it. It is now a 6.5. And I do think that is that. I mean, 7, 6.5 was already one that's it's intriguing to watch, right? It's already in the grounds of intriguing to watch. It's interesting to think about. It's not a movie I think is going to stand the test of time, and is not one that really adds to value in anyone's life at the end of the day. But it's interesting for a one-time watch, interesting for discussion, but I wouldn't put it as a top movie at all.
Yeah.
There you go. That's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We will be back next week. See you all then.